Hey everyone, it's Kong again, and here's another episode of Should You Summon. As always, I'm going to be presenting high-level overviews using these 4 criteria to help you decide whether this banner is worth your hard-earned vouchers and crystals. How these characters fit into your team, whether they unlock any bonds, what kind of content they get used for, and their future availability. So let's jump right into this Destiny banner featuring Emilia, ARES, and Betty, running from October 8th to the 21st. As a Destiny banner, of course your first SSR pull is guaranteed to be one of these 3 that you don't already have. After you get that first SSR, then it reverts to a normal raid up banner where you can start getting off-banner heroes. So let's start with Emilia. Emilia is a self-reviving tank like her daddy. She's actually kind of a reverse Vargas in other ways, since she converts her magic defense to her attack rather than her defense, and she has magic damage reduction in her talent. Also, unlike Vargas, she takes both physical and magical attacks for her guarded allies, and she can counterattack at 2 range. Fortunately, old Vargas will be getting ranged counter with his unique equipment. Anyway, like many tanks, her 3-cost skill is essentially an improved version of her natural guard. When she revives with it, she goes back up to 100% HP and gains some physical damage reduction. It also comes with a command aura that reduces critical damage for nearby allies. She's a member of Empire's Honor, buffed by Bernhardt, Leon, Lance, and Rosenseal, and Princess Alliance, buffed by Luna and Shelfaniel. For bonds, Emilia doesn't currently unlock any other character's bonds, since she's still a Langrisser mobile original character who only appears in the hypothetical future of a non-canon branching story path. For her own bonds, she needs Vargas and Young Jessica. Vargas is an easy one, but if you don't have Young Jessica yet, there's still 1 week left on her raid up banner with Wheeler. Now for content, in PvE, in the Eternal Temple, she's on faction for Leviar, not super useful, and Valkyrie, maybe useful as an expensive Vargas replacement. She's also on faction against Sleipnir and Needhog in Ancient Beckoning. She's fine. Like so many things in this game, if she's the tank you end up with early, then you roll with it and build her up, and she'll do the job for you. Being able to revive and counter at range and attack before your enemy is a very strong base contribution for tank in general run-of-the-mill PvE. She doesn't tend to get a lot of use in PvP, mainly because she's not Juglar or Landius. If you're missing one of those characters, then she can plug a gap for you. Her faction spread is set to improve with the launch of Rosenseal as a new Empire buffer in a couple of months. Also, our early glimpses of the Season 6 regular season show that running multiple tanks, sometimes as many as 4 or 5 in the box, will be a more popular strategy. This means you can have Landius, Juglar, Albedo or Hilda, and Ledin for example, with Emilia being a good pick to replace any of those that you're missing. I probably wouldn't build her up specifically to be a 4th or 5th tank. That seems kind of expensive to me, but like I said, if you're a newer player or you're missing one of the meta dominant tanks, or you're a hardcore Empire player, you'll be able to get some use out of her. For availability, Emilia isn't showing up again on the predicted banner schedule based on what we know about what's been released in China, which means you shouldn't expect to see her headline a banner before mid-April at the earliest. Alright, let's go ahead and move on to ARES. ARES is of course a top-tier PvP threat, with an oppressive effective range and great AoE and single-target DPS potential. His talent bumps up all of his stats except hit points up to plus 20% depending on how many enemies are nearby, and it also allows him to move through enemies. Okay, so moving through enemies is a big enough mechanical shakeup on its own, but his ridiculous 3-cost skill is also a big part of the reason he's so dangerous. After he pops it, he can move again with his remaining movement plus 4 in straight lines only. You gain plus 20% attack, and the reinforcement skill which heals 20% after taking action. Then, after dealing damage, he teleports any enemies within 2 rings to be beside him, like a tiny little Sleipnir, and hits them with an AoE blast. If you moved through an enemy on the way in, and picked up a talent stack, then you can move an additional 4 spaces to get away after. He's a member of Protagonists, buffed by Matthew, Empire's Honor, buffed by Bernhardt, Leon, Lance, and Rosenseal, and Langrisser Reincarnation, buffed by ARES and Hilda. So yes, he comes with his own fusion power, which increases damage dealt when enemies are nearby. Unfortunately, he never wants to carry it. At least in PvP, his skill slots are all accounted for. But wait, Hilda? That's right, it's finally time for Langrisser Reincarnation to become a real faction. Hilda's a new character coming out in March on global servers, and she's a tank with another Langrisser Reincarnation faction buff. Self-buffing tanks are usually faction linchpins, and she's actually shaping up to be a pretty bananas unit. We'll talk about her in more detail in the upcoming issue of the Langrisser Lookout, so stay tuned for that one on Monday. If you haven't already, consider subscribing and hitting that little notification bell thing. That way you'll make sure not to miss videos like that when they come out. Okay, so for bonds, he unlocks the attack bond for Maya and Rosalia, and the defensive bond for his sister Licorice. For his own bonds, he needs Maya for his defensive bond and Bozel for his attack bond. For content, in PvE he's on faction for Phoenix and Valkyrie in Eternal Temple, and Sleipnir and Hugin and Munin in Ancient Beckoning. He's not often touted as much of a PvE unit, but I actually find him to be a pretty good tool in an AoE bomb team for general purpose PvE like Timeless Trials, since he can charge through frontliners and then vacuum nearby enemies into one big cluster, and set them up for your follow-up AoEs. Obviously where he really shines is in PvP. His 3C gives him the ability to launch a spring-loaded attack from afar, which means your opponent always has to be on their toes counting tiles. If he does manage to get an opening, then his displacement can muck up enemy formation. Just make sure you have a good follow-up attack ready. He can be built for single target burst damage to bust Jugler, but that can be inconsistent. The bottom line is that he works well in a variety of box styles, and he's a common early ban simply because of how disruptive he can be. For availability, ARES is coming back on another Destiny banner in mid-February, alongside his original bannermate Maya and the recent new character Nomi. If you've already gotten Maya and you pull ARES here, then you can secure a guaranteed Destiny Nomi then. On the other hand, if you already have Maya and you recently got Nomi on her launch banner, then you might consider waiting to get your guaranteed ARES in February rather than rolling the dice on this one with Betty and Emilia on the banner. Really, it's up to you. Okay, so speaking of which, we'll move on to the third character on the banner, which is Betty. And Betty is infamously a contender for one of the game's worst SSR units. She's a tank who takes reduced damage from AoE attacks. If someone attacks a nearby ally, the attacker takes fixed damage and has a chance of being debuffed. Most of the rest of her kit is made up of passive support skills, which means she can't actually do much other than take hits. She does have a brand new unique helm that boosts her fixed damage by up to 30%, which at least synergizes with her talent, but it's not quite enough. She also has a 3-cost skill coming to global servers in February. As an active skill, it's basically Sword Dance, doing damage plus additional fixed damage to enemies in 2 rings and preventing healing. It has a passive component that lets Betty survive an AoE attack that would have killed her up to 3 times per battle. It also doubles down on her talent, hitting an enemy who attacks a nearby ally, and 2 additional units near that enemy, with a minus 15% damage dealt debuff. Notably, all of this stuff from her original base kit, to her gear, to her 3C, basically just serves to make her more annoying. Her purpose is to be annoying. She's a member of Legion of Glory, buffed by Ledin, Elwyn, and Grenier, Empire's Honor, buffed by Bernhardt, Leon, Lance, and Rosenseal, and Dark Reincarnation, buffed by Bozel and Licorice. For bonds, thankfully Betty's not required to unlock any other character's bonds, and for her own bonds, she only needs Lance. For content, she's technically on faction for Leviar, Scylla, and Valkyrie in Eternal Temple, but she probably won't be too much help in those fights. She's also on faction for Hugin and Munin, Fenrir, and Sleipnir in Ancient Beckoning. The only place I've really seen her get decent use is in AI arena defense teams, when she'll usually be facing off against mindless AoE bots who don't know how to avoid her strengths. Yes, I know there was that one guy who had some good clips using her in Apex against people who underestimated her or relentlessly blasted her with AoEs for some reason. That's not going to be a consistent or reliable strategy. Some touted her as a potential counter to the AoE debuff meta in Season 5, but that didn't really seem to pan out in China. Maybe things will be different here? Question mark. For availability, Like Emilia, Betty's not showing up in the predicted schedule, so don't expect her to headline a banner before mid-April at the earliest. Okay, so here's the quick and dirty. We have Emilia, who's a self-reviving tank, who has a ranged counterattack, and converts her magic defense to her attack. We have ARES, who's a dominant PvP unit with a game-changing ability to ignore enemy obstruction. He unlocks attack bonds for Maya and Rosalia, and the defensive bond for Licorice. And he carries a faction buff for Langrisser Reincarnation. And finally we have Betty, who's an AI arena defense nuisance, and her upcoming 3C lets her survive 3 fatal AoEs, so that's something. And finally, just the usual reminder about upcoming banners. Next week is the return of the Landius, Yulia, and Juglar banner, so if you're missing any of those dynamite units, you might want to hold off and do the old overlapping banner summoning strategy. In fact, if the fact that you were missing Landius or Juglar was one of your reasons for considering summoning for Emilia, I would suggest holding off and getting one of those instead. The week after that, when this ARES banner expires, is the launch of 2 new characters, the Tree Sage and Helena. So let me know in the comments if you're tossing a few summons at this one, or if you're planning to keep saving up. Personally, I have ARES already, but I am missing Emilia and Betty. Seems like it might be folly to go in for one, even to eliminate them from future Destiny banner considerations when I have an 80% chance to get Juglar to 6-star next week. And then when a character I'm really excited about is coming after that. But then again, those blank spots in my collection. So anyway, thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next Should You Summon.